All right, it looks like it's just about time to get started. So we will go ahead and jump into our webinar today. So today we are going to look at how we can use the science of reading to really improve word recognition and decoding. My name is Margaret Opatz, and I am a reading research scientist here at CAPD. So as far as today's webinar goes, we are really going to be diving into an essential aspect of reading development, and this is word recognition and decoding. So without further ado, let's jump into how we can improve word recognition and decoding. So for today's outline of the webinar, what we'll look at first is really think about what makes word reading difficult. And then we'll get into how we can really focus on decoding and word recognition for adolescent readers, because it differs greatly from primary grade readers. So when we think about adolescent readers, that's really defined as anyone starting in 4th grade all the way up through 12th grade. And then we'll look at some instructional practices, and I'll definitely leave time for any questions that you may have. But like I also mentioned, Ryan is here and he is happy to answer any question that you may have along the way. So let's jump into this first part. So in thinking about what makes word reading difficult, and specifically in English, what makes it difficult? So as I was putting together the slides for today, I was reminded of one of my very first experiences teaching, where I was teaching 4th and 5th grade, a combo class with primarily English learners. And in the 4th and 5th grade class, I was expected or kind of like encouraged to teach phonics. So that's what I did. I taught phonics to my students, and they didn't look quite like this. They were 4th and 5th graders, so like 8, 9, 10, around there. But I taught phonics, and I taught that one-to-one letter correspondence. And then I taught them, right, like that we know, like C says k, A says ah, and then I taught them to blend that word together to say cat. I gave them tools for doing this, such as tapping. So k, at, cat, grabbing that word. I also had them do some manipulatives where they're sounding out each sound in the word and then blending it together. We called it say it, move it. And then that was great going through the letter correspondence. So A says ah, C says k. But then we got to word, and this all kind of fell apart. So it's not penny that we got to. We got to the word scent. And all of a sudden, the phonics rules that I had taught didn't work. So C didn't say k. So then I had to teach another rule. And things started to get a little bit confusing. I had to teach that rule where C says s anytime it's followed by E, I, or Y. So my students had that one-to-one letter correspondence, but we needed to even go further than that, into more deeper level of skills within word recognition and decoding. But that wasn't the only issue. So I was teaching 4th and 5th grade, and the state that I was teaching in, this was a common thing that my students saw within a textbook. So they were learning about volcanoes, and they saw this word volcano. They would show me how they could even tap out the various sounds in the word, which is very complicated when you get to a word like volcano. Really tapping, that type of methodology that is big in like Orton Gillingham, that really only works if you have a pretty short word. Maybe even I would suggest keeping it to 4 letters, because you have 4 fingers to really tap before you're grabbing the word. So they could even try to tap this out. But the problem that they were running into is the word volcano wasn't isolated. It was surrounded by this very difficult text. So even though I was really adamantly teaching phonics and teaching them that sound to letter correspondence, it really wasn't enough, because my 4th and 5th graders were entering into other content areas where the skill of that one-to-one letter to sound correspondence wasn't enough. And then we also started to notice that a word like volcano sounds different when you add on different suffixes. So volcano versus volcanic. They had to start to learn how that changed the way that we pronounce words. So all of this to say is that when we get into the upper elementary and into secondary classrooms, um, basic phonics instruction just isn't enough for adolescent readers. So before we kind of get into specific strategies, I do want to take a look at like what makes word reading in English difficult. So there are definitely things that make it difficult, and we know this. So first of all, English is not transparent. We have an orthographic or an orthography that is opaque. And this means that we don't have that one-to-one letter-to-sound correspondence. So in English, there are 26 letters, but there are 44 phonemes or sounds. So this starts to create an issue. So when we're starting to teach students how to decode words, they need to know that there are 20 vowel sounds and that there are 24 consonant sounds, and that we're going to have to reuse some of the letters that we've already learned to create these different sounds by bringing them together in different letter combinations. And now, I think it's kind of helpful to know too that there's a reason for this. This doesn't just happen because whoever made English wanted it to be really difficult. It's really because our language is made up of multiple different languages. So we've really like brought together all of these various languages to create the system that we have. So we really have these different layers within language. We have the Anglo-Saxon layer, and then we have the Latin or Romance layer, and then we also have Greek. So we're really pulling in all of these different languages to kind of operate in a different way. So let me get into that a little bit more. So when we think about Anglo-Saxon words, these make up the 15 to 20% of English words that are pretty common. So these are common words, they're everyday words. Most kids, when they go to school, will know most of these words. But these are also those words that are found most frequently in the primary grade reading textbooks or texts that students are reading. So when they're learning phonics, they're primarily learning these Anglo-Saxon words like cat and dog. These are words that do follow that like one sound to one letter correspondence. We could easily tap them. We could use different types of manipulatives to really help students get the meaning of those words, or I shouldn't really say the meaning, but getting the sounds, producing the sounds in the words. This isn't the case for some of the other types of words. So when we look at Latin, this is where 55% of words live in English. So within the Romance languages, and often it is just referred to as Latin, these are really technical and sophisticated words that are used in more formal settings. And you can see the list of languages that really comprise the Romance layer of our layers of English. So when we think about Latin roots, these definitely operate differently from Anglo-Saxon words. Anglo-Saxon words typically stand on their own. We can even make like compound words out of those Anglo-Saxon words, but they're like pretty easy to decipher like what they mean. So one could be like doghouse. We know that it's a house for a dog. But that's not the case for the Latin roots. So when we look at Latin, this becomes a lot more challenging because we have these roots that can have affixes attached to them to make new words. So this starts to get a little bit more challenging because we need to know what that root word is to really be able to make sense of how the root word is changed when we add a prefix or a suffix to it. And then the last layer is the Greek layer, and this is just about 10 to 12% of words in English. And when we think about this layer, it's really those specialized words, and they're most commonly used in math and science. We do have some that we use pretty frequently, like photograph, but they are typically more specialized to math and science. So an example here would be the root of bio, and then how we can really change that, um, change the meaning based off of the context of the rest of the word. So that kind of gives us some insight into why decoding in English or why reading words in English is difficult. And it's really because we've um, pulled together or borrowed from other languages to really construct the language that we have, and that we have to teach students to read. So before we get into decoding a little bit more, I want to just think about this. So we know that decoding is really important. It's really that foundational skill that students need to be able to take the words off of the page so that they can start to make meaning. So it's really that sounding out. So when we think about decoding, when a student can start to accurately and fluently decode, it starts to promote independent reading. And we know that once students do know how to create that letter to sound combination or letter to sound correspondence and get that off of the page, they're going to start to be able to decode unfamiliar words. And I don't think I have to belabor the point of how important decoding is, but there's some pretty interesting research out there. This one comes from um, researchers at ETS, and they actually found that there is a decoding threshold. And if this is new terminology, it was to me not too long ago as well. But basically, what they found is that students in fifth grade and up, if they don't have a certain threshold of being able to decode the words on a page, their comprehension is just flat. And that's what you see on the left side of that red line. So any student who um, was not able to decode the words on the page, their comprehension was flat. The difference was once students were able to comprehend a certain amount of words, it actually influenced their comprehension. So we know that there is this reciprocal relationship where if you are a strong decoder, you can contribute to stronger comprehension. And I don't think that should be surprising, but I think that's just really important because I mentioned that it was fifth grade and up. Uh, so really we're talking about adolescent readers really need to be skilled at decoding to be able to make sense of what's in the text. And it looks very different than our primary grade type of instruction. So when we think about decoding for older students, we do know that there's that decoding threshold, and an assessment should tell you what is that decoding threshold? Where is it that students can start to make some good gains in what they're able to do in decoding to be able to contribute to reading comprehension. But for older students specifically, we know that if they do not have developed a strong development of word recognition skills, it actually is incapacitating. It pretty much limits all that they can do within reading because they don't have the ability to really pull the words off of the page. So one thing that we can do is provide interventions. So we know that students who are provided with interventions, especially those that are multi-component, meaning that within a word recognition and decoding type of intervention, we're going to pull in other components, meaning fluency, repeated reading, looking at the relationships across sentences. We want to pull in those multiple components, even when we have the focus on word recognition decoding, because students do better in that type of intervention. So you might be thinking, what does this all mean? What should I do to help older students? And when I say older students, really adolescent students, so grades 4 and up. Uh, what can we do to support them in making sense of the text by being able to decode the words on the page? So fortunately, there are great practices that we can do to really support students. So first of all, we need to teach word analysis. This looks very different, like I mentioned already, from the primary grades. We're not going to just teach that sound to letter correspondence. We certainly would if that's where students need to start. But what the secondary students really need is learning syllable types. First of all, they have to know what is a syllable and what are the types of syllables. And then they need to know syllabication rules. Where do we separate the syllables? How do we know where we separate the syllables? Um, and then they need to really be able to look at a multisyllabic word and analyze that word. What are the word parts that go together? What are the syllable types? And then being able to bring it all together by reading that word. And then also asking them, well, what does that word mean? Are there any word parts that help you figure out what that means? Part of this too is really being able to look at Latin and Greek roots. And I think that should be kind of clear why we would want to look at those based off of how English works with those various layers. And then we also need to do it in context. So what that means is we're going to put it into a text. So the words that we've been analyzing should also be in the text that students are reading, so that they see that again and again. And then that will actually work to promote that building of automatic word recognition. We're really working on that orthographic mapping where we are seeing this word again and again, and it's going to lower the amount of time that it takes us to decode that word every single time that we see it. But there are also ways that we can build automatic word recognition, and that's through timed list reads. I'll show you an example of what that is a little bit later. And then also timed fluency reads. So really being able to help students build up their fluency, but being intentional with the text that you're using to ensure that they're seeing those words that they've practiced in isolation so that they can also confront them in a connected text. And then I've also added here intentional wide reading. And this really means that students are reading texts that are on a variety of topics, but we still want to be selective in choosing the texts that that we've really focused on those isolated words. We want them to be in all of the texts that they're reading. So as an example, if you know that they have been practicing on analyzing volcano and they can do it in isolation, and then you want them to be able to also see volcanic, selecting multiple texts on volcanoes or volcanic eruptions would be a really helpful way to do that for students. As far as the instruction goes for adolescent readers, we're still going to really focus on decoding instruction that is systematic and explicit. So when we say systematic, that means that it's following a planned or logical sequence. And this means that you're working through a sequence of materials so that you know that students are getting access to all of the various spelling patterns or the various vowel types so that students really can develop their skills over time. And then it also needs to be explicit. So when we think about explicit instruction, I love what Joe Torgensen said here. It does not leave anything to chance. So we're making sure that students know the syllable types or know the syllabication rules, and we're ensuring that they are able to take that on by themselves to do it independently so that when they're in their own text, they can do that all on their own. And we know that that will help to increase their decoding ability and then also their ability to problem solve on their own when they start to read, which will then automatically build more vocabulary for them. We know that we can't explicitly teach all the vocabulary that students need to know. A lot of that is coming from independent reading and being able to take the meaning off of the page to comprehend new words. So you might be thinking, but where do we start? Because adolescent readers are very different in terms of the instruction that they've had in the past and their specific needs. So My best recommendation of where to start is measure word recognition and decoding. If you think that a student has needs in building their ability to decode these multisyllabic words, measure it. So one of the things that we have here at CAPD is Read Basics, and we have a word recognition and decoding subtest. So if you were to give this subtest, you would be able to measure whether or not students are able to decode uh, real words, if they can tell if a word is a nonsense word, or if they can tell that it's a pseudo homophone. And if you've never heard that phrase, that essentially means that it is a word that sounds like a real word when you sound it out. So it's like in this instance, it's car with a K. So we know that's not like the traditional spelling of car, but when you sound it out, it sounds like car. This item type is extremely helpful for determining if students have memorized a huge number of sight words, um, or if they can go back to those very foundational skills of being able to decode that letter to sound correspondence to be able to see, do they know that K says K? So that is a really helpful tool. So let's say that you gave a screener and you found that students might need some help. Here at CAPG, what we definitely encourage is after giving a screener, so let's say you gave Read Basics and the word recognition and decoding test, and you found the student definitely needs support. Maybe they're even below that decoding threshold. We encourage you to use either a phonics survey or a spelling inventory to really pinpoint what is it that students need? Where should I start? For the most part, an adolescent reader likely has that sound to letter correspondence that they get from the early years of instruction. That's not always the case. So I would definitely suggest if the phonics survey does say start with phonics, like the very foundational phonics, um, start there. Um, but what we typically find is that students have a pretty good grasp of that sound to letter correspondence. They can likely decode a lot of those Anglo-Saxon words like cat, dog. They've got that kind of framework down. Where they really start to struggle is in these bigger multisyllabic words that really pack a lot of meaning into one word. So the best recommendation is to really teach word analysis. And when I say teach word analysis, what that really is a component of is teaching the meta-linguistic awareness where you're helping them recognize how language works. So what we would first do in this path of teaching word analysis is make sure that students know what a syllable is. So we want them to know that words are made up of syllables, and we also want them to know that a syllable, it has to have a vowel. Now, there could be consonants before or after it, but there has to be a vowel. This is also another great way to see if students can really distinguish between what's a consonant and what's a vowel. Um, and then what we'll do from there is teach the syllable types. So there are a lot of curricula out there that really support with guiding you in teaching really this like multisyllabic word analysis. But they really should follow this type of pattern where you're looking at 6 different syllable types. So you're starting with closed, and really teaching students explicitly that a closed syllable contains one vowel with one or more consonants closing that vowel in. And you'll also teach that in a closed syllable, the vowel says its short sound. So A says ah. So in this case, we have cat. But then you'll go on to the more complex type of syllable types, which would be like the vowel team. So there are some vowel teams like OA and others that make more than one sound, and those can be really challenging for students. but that's really helpful when you're going through a multisyllabic word intervention, that it's going to explicitly teach students how to do that. There are really some great resources. So if you do have any questions about like where should we start, we'd be happy to point you in the direction of where to start with those. So once students have a grasp of the syllable types, then what we really want to do is start to teach them the syllable division rules. These are also called syllabication rules. So really we want to help students know, how do we break apart the syllables within a word? And sometimes we do have to be flexible in the way that we do that. So for the first rule, if it is, we have napkin. So if we have a vowel separated by two consonants, we usually separate right between those two consonants. So students learn that, and for the most part, that stands true. Then for the second rule, let's say we have two vowels separated by one consonant. Sometimes we separate after that consonant, but sometimes we separate before. So typically what we'll teach students is that you will try it typically after that first consonant or after the consonant. And then if that does not produce a word that they know in English, then try that first one. Because you'll see that it actually makes that first syllable is open here, but it was closed up here. And I will just reiterate that a good multisyllabic word intervention will teach the teacher this as well. These are not things that we typically just grow up knowing. We have to really learn this explicitly. And even as a native English speaker who went through a program for teaching, I didn't learn this until I started teaching and doing a practicum for my master's. So I think that this is not something that is readily known because it's not taught a lot to teachers. But these really do help in supporting students in being able to decode these much more complex multisyllabic words. You'll notice here too, rule 6, this one's really important for adolescent readers. It says, divide syllables after a prefix and before a suffix. So right there, that implies that students need to know the morphemes in English and really know what is a prefix, what is a suffix, and then how does that change the meaning of the word? That'll be really important in terms of helping them make sense of or not make sense of it, but really comprehend the words that they're decoding. So then the next step is really, after we know that there are syllables, we know these syllable division rules, students really need to be able to do some isolated word analysis. So giving them a word like this that's on the screen, being able to tell you where the syllables are divided, and then also being able to decode it. So saying cat, nip, and then putting it together, catnip. The same would be true for more complex types of words where we have a vowel team here and a vowel consonant E syllable here. They still need to know that they're going to separate between the T and the L, and then they would still need to be able to sound it out and really focus on relying on their previously taught knowledge or previously acquired knowledge to really be able to decode these words. And then something I think that's really important, and I just pointed it out as that sixth syllabication rule, students need to know morphemes. And morphemes are really important. We're talking about decoding today, but we really can't separate morphemes from decoding because English is a morphophonemic language. So what this means is that our spelling system does two things. It represents the meaning in words and the sound. So when we think about words that have these morphemes in them, it is imperative for students to know, what do these various morphemes mean? So in a word like this. If a student knows that BI means two, they'll be able to keep that meaning unit together. And that's really important when we get into more morphologically complex words, because sometimes we don't follow all of the rules when we have these morphologically complex words, because the morpheme is actually doing some of the work for us to really be able to break that word apart. So in this case, if they know that bi means two, that's also going to help them be able to understand what bifurcate means, which is really the breaking into two. And it's more deep than that, but that would be a really great help for students. So I do have to say that there's some good news for us when we're thinking about what do we do about these morphologically complex words? How do we teach students to really be able to understand the meaning of these prefixes and suffixes, and I will say additionally the base words. But here's some good news. Within English, 9 prefixes actually make up 76% of all prefixed words. So if you were to teach these prefixes here, that would be a really great help to students. We know that there are more that should be taught, but these would be really helpful for students to really be able to unpack the meaning of those prefixes. And then the same is true for suffixes. There are really 6 that make up 80% of all suffixed words. I think about this last one down here when I was teaching 4th and 5th grade, and I saw that volcanoes were a huge topic, and it wasn't just volcanoes, it was really about like the changes in land and like those processes that change the land. So looking at words with tion at the end and teaching students that says shun was extremely helpful for them in their decoding, but also it was helpful for them to learn that tion was really about transforming a verb into a noun, and it was really compacting a process. So if you think like erupt to eruption, that ion at the end was extremely helpful for them to recognize that, first of all, it was a noun. So it packed together this like entire process. And then second, like them just knowing that it said shun, they didn't have to try to sound out tion, which would not make shun if we were looking at that sound to letter correspondence. So those are really helpful in terms of teaching, but we know that there's more that students need to know. And one of the best resources that I've come to know is really Coxhead's academic word list. So if you're not familiar with this, this is a really great resource. And if you just Google it, there's tons of resources out there on it. But Avril Coxhead put together this academic word list of like the most commonly used words in that tier 2, Beck and McCohen's tier 2 words, vocabulary words that are really used in that academic setting. But something that I really like about something else that Coxhead has done is she has put together this list of words that will have the root word. So here's like interpret, and then it lists all of the various forms of interpret. So how else, what might we see it? You could use this type of list to really support students in being able to look at how is that base word of interpret, like how do we change it by adding either prefixes or suffixes to that base word. And you can see like this, and the interpret goes on for quite a ways here. So by being able to help students kind of conceptualize how broad interpret goes based off of all of these different meanings will be really helpful for them. And then you can also look at like, well, if I'm using interpreted, what is that ed really signaling as compared to if you're looking at ing? What is that signaling? I mean, you can really get into that conversation of being able to differentiate between those various suffixes and the way that they change the meaning of the word. So I highly encourage you to check out Coxhead's academic word list. Um, and then, okay, so now that we've kind of talked a lot about like that uh, isolated word analysis, then I also believe, based off of research and what the science of reading really tells us, is that we need to help students really confront these words in context. So that means that when you're looking at a text, we want to be able to identify those words that students must know to really fully grasp the meaning of the text. And then before students actually read the text, I want to help them read the word. So I want to first I want to see, do students know the word? So I can point at the word and say, okay, read this word. What does this word say? And if they don't know, help them break it apart into syllables. Side note here, I know that you can't read that. These are all from a volcano text. So these would be words that would be helpful for students to know before they actually read the text. So if students don't know it, help them break it into syllables and then decode the word syllable by syllable and then consolidate it by reading it together. So if it's like erupt, if they don't know that, help them break it into two syllables, e and then rupt and then erupt. And then that can be repeated through the selected words. So you could think about doing this a couple of different ways. So you could look at it through that tier 3 or discipline specific lens, where you're really looking for the words that are connected to volcanoes. That one's typically easier for us to do. We could also look at it through that tier 2 or general academic vocabulary context. And this one's a little bit more challenging typically for us to do because we don't have the academic word list or tier 2 words memorized. We don't know exactly what's on that list. So one thing that I find to be extremely helpful is an academic word list highlighter. And what this does is it actually will take any text that you paste into it. And if you're interested in having that resource, I can share it in the chat later on. But basically, you can go to this website and it's an academic word list highlighter. So you select the text and then you copy it and say like submit. And it highlights, and that's what these words are here. It highlights the words from Coxhead's academic word list. And this is really helpful because then you know which words students need to know for that general academic vocabulary. So instead of you having to like cross-reference that list, you can really just look at what's highlighted here and then determine which words do students really need to know. So this was for about a 5th grade text. So you can see some of the words here. I'm not sure if you can read them, but one says significantly, and then here's another one that says occur. And then here we have areas, which I think is interesting. Areas seems like such a low-level word in a way, but then when you start to think about it, that it's used across so many different domains, it becomes kind of like more important to recognize that students need to know it in each specific discipline. So in science, what does it mean when we say area? Well, that one's going to be connected to the volcano. So it means like that volcanic area or the area around the volcano. As compared to like if you're thinking about find the area in math, we're still talking about like an area, but going about that is completely different than conceptualizing the area around a volcano. It means something different in each of the disciplines. So that's really thinking about really putting it into context so that students have the ability to see those words in the text. So we're really using this text, identifying the words within the text that students must know, helping them then decode it and then practice reading it. So we want them to read that entire passage. So then once you've really done the isolated words and then really practice it within context, then we move into really building automatic word recognition. And when we say automatic, if you've ever given like a Dibbles assessment, or another assessment that is timed and it's really based off of students knowing the words automatically. We're saying that students should be able to recognize the word within 3 seconds. That's what, when we think about automatic word recognition, that's what we're really getting to, is that 3 second recall. So to do this, I've already mentioned a couple of ways where we can like build in those repeated readings, or help students see the word again and again. But there are other things that we can do as well. So here's an example of a timed word list. And this one actually comes from a reading clinic at the University of Utah. And this one is based off of tier 2 words. And what students do is they're actually timed in reading. So they go through and read the list multiple times. And then they're going to chart the number of errors that they got. And then they chart the amount of time that it took them as well. And then over time, we see that their errors decrease and then the time also decreases. So they're getting more fluent at reading this. I do like this type of thing for supporting students, kind of like on that individual level where like they can use a grade level tier 2 word list to be able to do this. This is actually a component of an intervention, that this is the homework. So they take it home. They've already gone over it during tutoring, and then they take it home and do it at home as well to really help to build up their ability to automatically recognize these words. Again, if students struggle with a word, it can be really helpful to help them analyze it. What are the syllables? And then really being able to break it down into the syllables and read it at that individual syllable level, but then also bring it all together. And then the next thing that is really helpful in terms of building automatic word recognition is timed fluency reads. So what this really looks like is giving students a passage that's between 1 to 300 words. So the focus on this is building that automatic word recognition, but we're doing it through fluency. So once we have the text, we can have the student read it, and we're going to record any errors that the student makes, and then give them that immediate feedback. So we're going to give that immediate error correction feedback, where the teacher or a peer is providing the correct pronunciation of a word or helping them analyze the word to really be able to read it accurately. So then students read the passage again, and this can be up to 5 times. I think that would be a lot, but if students are motivated to continue to improve, they can continue to do it. So here's an example of what this chart looks like. So we have some charting here where the student does the words read per minute, and you can actually see like how they improve from timing 1 to timing 4. That's what we want to see. And then we can also see the student started with 2 errors, went down to 0, and then they made 1 error both other times. But we're at least seeing a decrease in the number of errors from that first read to the last read. And that's what we're really hoping to see. It is important to use a chart, and especially for older students who can do this independently, I think this can be really helpful in terms of motivating, like, whoa, look where you started, and like, look how much more you read after you read it a couple of times. I also think that this helps with encouraging students to reread so that they can gain more meaning from the text. So this entire process is really about building automatic word recognition through building their fluency, but we're also like helping them build in other strategies that skilled readers do, which is rereading or looking back in a text to either clarify or find meaning from the text. So then the final thing, especially with AI now, is that we can actually ask whatever AI system you're using, we can actually ask it to like rewrite a text to include specific academic words. So if you know that there are like specific words that students have struggled with, or you want them to really learn and know, you can actually ask them to or ask it to include these specific words. So you can see here what the prompt was. So it was a 150-word article describing a US senator at a 5th grade level, and then including these various words. And then you've got it right there, which I think this is a great use of AI in terms of really being able to be intentional about helping students see the words again and again, because we know that each exposure to the specific words will decrease the amount of time that the student needs to decode. So over time, it'll become more and more or increasingly automatic. All right, so I've just really thrown a lot at you. So I just kind of want to like sum up everything, and then I'll leave some time for any questions that you may have. So today, we've really talked about how we can help improve word recognition and decoding for adolescent readers. And really, if I could just like break it down, I think there's a couple things that we really need to do. We need to know where to start with adolescent readers. If you have any question after giving a screener, use a phonics survey or a spelling inventory to really pinpoint what is the need of the student. What is it that will be most beneficial? Students may need that letter to sound correspondence that's found within a phonics curriculum, but they may be ready to get into more multisyllabic word instruction. So then after you know where to start, really follow a path. So I've kind of laid out a word analysis path today, and that would include teaching syllable types and then moving to syllabication rules, and then also teaching those morphemes, knowing that the morphological aspect of English is so important, meaning that those like word parts really help with meaning and also with decoding. That's really important to teach. And then we also need to build in the opportunity for students to practice reading within the context. So just doing isolated practice won't really help once students get into connected text. So we need to provide them with specific practices to really tackle those words in the context of a connected text. And then we should support them in rereading those texts. And then also we should provide students with opportunities to widely read texts that are on the same topic. So when we think about this, it could be, if it's going back to volcanoes, you could actually have students read fictional texts about volcanoes. There are lots of those based off of the Hawaiian Islands. And then you could also have them reading more of those technical type of texts as well. So then the last thing that we can really do is support students in building automatic word recognition. And that can be done through reading and then rereading lists of words. Same thing with passages, and then also creating those opportunities for students to really see the words that they have practiced within the text that they're reading. So one way you could do that is through ChatGPT or another AI operation. All right, so I just want to say thank you for attending, and yes, we will post this or send it out.